Hi. Artists and paintings and drawings is an outdated medium, and it's been outdated for a while. In the dinosaur era, before the invention of cameras and Burger Kings, art had a very specific purpose, depicting important people and events. Whether or not they're real didn't necessarily matter, but that's beside the point. These days, however, art is increasingly becoming irrelevant, particularly with the rise of AI. To a lot of people, this is all that art is, and to them I say, please shut the fuck up. The very earliest art was probably made by our monkey ancestors, literally flinging shit at the wall to see what stuck. However, in our several tens of thousands year transition between being dumb animals and dumb animals who happen to have clothes on, there were some pretty creative works made along the way. Whoever had the idea to get everybody in the tribe to paint over their hands for no particular reason should be applauded, because this shit is easily one of the coolest arts on the planet. This is in what's now Argentina, but 10,000 years ago was nothing, and that's vaguely how old these handprints actually are, which to me is a wee bit fucking mental. This is potentially the oldest surviving cave art on the planet, and it was only found in 2017. But these handprints are so old, a lot of nerds think that they might not even be from our species. These are from what's now Spain, in caves with a shitload of prehistoric art that's at least 41,000 years old, maybe even fucking more. Not including the watermark. This art is a fucking shit. Can we have a cave art revival, please? Oh yeah, and this is apparently the oldest art in the world. Although to me, it just looks like some holes in a rock, I'm not gonna lie. These things are brilliant because they're basically mobile cave paintings. Well, maybe mobile isn't quite the right word considering they're still massive slabs of rock, but all the same. This is basically Viking art, and yes, that is as metal as it sounds. These things used to be brightly coloured monuments to the dead, left scattered around wherever the Vikings had recently been visiting.
How many unarmed British monks can you slaughter?
As you'd expect, they're mostly in Scandinavia, and there's also quite a lot in the British Isles. And also one on a Ukrainian island in the Black Sea for some reason. A lot of the ones in Britain look quite Celtic-y with a lot of Celtic knots and cross symbolism. But this isn't a video about that kind of art, just paintings and drawings, thank you very much. Which you know, this barely is, but I just wanted to talk about Vikings for a bit. Much medieval art is obsessed with religion, and frankly, that bores me to tears. However, look at these absolute spawns from hell. Now, allegedly, the painters of the day intentionally fucked up baby paintings because they wanted the cunts to look like Jesus. Because apparently Jesus came out of the room fully formed and unchanged. But wouldn't that mean he came out as a grown man? Well, apparently not. He just had the face of a fully grown man, but on a baby's body, which is absolutely horrifying. Because most European art of this era was commissioned by churches, you get a lot of 40-year-old Jesus babies, and that sort of popularised painting all babies in this style. Am I the only person who thinks this makes absolutely zero sense and figures they just couldn't draw? We're going to jump around a fair bit here with the history, but stay with me. Mona Lisa is probably the most famous painting in the world, but for quite a long time it was actually relatively obscure. It depicts a noble woman from Florence who had a relatively unnoteworthy life, and it was painted by Leonardo da Vinci at a time where he was more broke than I'm going to be after I finish my university course. Because Leo didn't have a lot of money, he started taking commissions from the nobility. Despite this, however, he never actually did finish the bloody thing, and he didn't accept the money either, meaning the entire process was more or less a complete waste of time. Skipping forward a bit, Leo's dead and the painting gets sold, eventually finding its way into the hands of the French monarchy, who in turn were eventually beheaded, leaving Napoleon to take the painting and hang it in his bedroom until he was exiled and the painting was moved to the Louvre. Even at this point though, hardly anyone ordinary actually knew much about the painting at all, until it was stolen in 1911. In trying to recover it, the press made a big hoopla about the theft, and long story short, that's why it's now so famous. How was it stolen?
Lego City, the crooks are stealing the
Mona Lisa.
Well, authorities initially suspected Pablo Picasso, which, I mean, frankly, is a given, but actually it was this guy who worked at the museum, and he stole it by hiding in a broom closet, waiting until the museum was closed, and then just walking out with it under his coat. It was recovered 2 years later. The big takeaway here is that if it wasn't stolen, it definitely would not be nearly as famous as it is today, because let's face it, it's not actually a very good painting. This It is so much better. It's so clearly it's clearly better. I'm no artist, but I do have these goggles, so I think I'm qualified to say colours are more interesting, the background is more interesting. It's just a better painting. What this is, or what many experts think this is an earlier version of the Mona Lisa by Da Vinci. It wasn't uncommon for Da Vinci to make several different versions of the same painting, and there are a lot of similarities, especially in the hands. The differences though are just as interesting. For one thing, Lisa's a lot younger here, the colours are darker, and the background is completely different. It's thought a lot of the background was added in later, potentially not by Da Vinci, because he did leave a lot of work unfinished after all, but this sketch by Raphael, made when he visited Da Vinci's workshop, shows something pretty similar, so it's a safe bet there's still a lot of Da Vinci in there. I know art is subjective and all, but this to me is clearly a better painting, and I'd say it's got just as interesting a history. Alright, it wasn't stolen, but the guy just hid in a cupboard and strolled out of the museum with the painting under his coat. It wasn't Ocean's 11. And sure, this version wasn't hanging up in Napoleon's bedroom, but I mean, it's just hanging up in his bedroom. Of course, the art world doesn't care about any of this. They just want you to see the one and only world famous Mona Lisa behind 40 people's iPhones. There's a tiny country in Italy which has a big palace, which is a famous chapel, which is where historically the popes like to touch children. On the ceiling is a shit ton of paintings by Michelangelo di Lodovico Boratici. He was mainly a sculptor, and again, just paintings and drawings today, thank you. But considering sculptures was his main shit, he did a pretty good fucking job. To him, this was just a distraction from what he was actually interested in. I mean, it's great to have a side project. These videos for me are a side project, they're just a bit of fun. His was the fucking Sistine Chapel. So initially they weren't actually sure how they were going to get Michelangelo up to the top of the ceiling to paint it. So the Pope goes to the architect and he says,
"We need to get our boy Mike up to the ceiling."
So the architect spends ages coming up with a system, and long story short, it doesn't actually work. So the Pope just goes to Michelangelo and says, you know, figure it out for yourself. And he actually does. Not only is painting not his main shit, but now he's also constructed this platform for himself so he can get up to the ceiling to do the painting, which again isn't even mainly what he's well known for. In a lot of the paintings there's a fair amount of nudes, and one of the priests had a huge problem with this. He thought it was really offensive that there was all of this nudity in the Sistine Chapel. So he goes to the Pope and has a bitch about it. and in response, Michelangelo takes his likeness, paints him naked in hell with donkey ears and a snake biting his dick off. Which is probably the most hardcore thing I think was ever done in the Renaissance era. Allegedly, the priest then goes to the Pope and has a bitch about it, but the Pope says, well, he doesn't have any jurisdiction over hell, so his hands were tied. I refuse to believe a Pope has ever had a sense of humour, but if that is true, that is pretty fucking funny. Just as a side note, it's thought Michelangelo died a virgin, and he didn't really know what women look like. I can't show you what I mean, because YouTube doesn't want to free the nipple, but Google some of his paintings and look out for the women in them. They basically look like muscular dudes, and the tits are like all over the place. Like your mum's.
Van Gogh.
Van Gogh.
Van Gogh died depressed, unrecognised and unappreciated at the age of only 37 when he tragically killed himself. Maybe. The thing is, although for most of Vincent's life he was basically a nobody, in the last 2 years of his life that actually started to change. Sure, the mainstream art world wasn't interested, but in the avant-garde scene he was beginning to gain a following, with his work being exhibited in Paris and Brussels. Now, calling him famous would be a bit of a stretch, but he did have a following. It wasn't huge, but it was there. All of this is often overlooked because it doesn't fit the art world's narrative. There is also some debate over whether his death was even a suicide. The bullet wound that killed Van Gogh was in his stomach, not exactly the natural first choice for a suicide attempt, and he didn't leave a note or address it in many of his writings, which could be seen as unusual given the fact that he was a very prolific writer. Now, he did have severe mental illnesses, potentially including bipolar disorder, which might explain his mood swings, but even then it's hard to imagine anyone, regardless of their state of mind, trying a suicide attempt by shooting themselves in the stomach. A bullet wound in the stomach is one of the most painful ways to die from a firearm, and Vincent would have been in a lot of agony walking back to town. So if he was trying to kill himself that day, he might think he wouldn't want to go through the pain and would instead make a second attempt aiming for his head, for example. According to Vanity Fair, some senior researchers at the Van Gogh Foundational Archives and Museum do think there's a case to be made here. A big problem is that there's very little evidence from the time. There are no surviving police records of the incident, and much of the first-hand accounts aren't all that first-hand after all. One senior scholar even ventured some support for our doubts. "Your case is very strong," he mused. "There are several things that puzzle one if you want to explain suicide. He showed no intention of stepping out." We found out later that another museum researcher had already expressed his own suspicions about the suicide story. In 2006, he brought them to the attention of a senior official. He advised them to abandon that line of inquiry as it was too controversial. Now, this isn't a true crime video, and I don't want to get too bogged down in if he committed suicide or not. I just think it's worth pointing out that even suggesting there might be more to the story never really gets brought up. Until making this video, I thought he died in total obscurity, so it was surprising to find out he was actually starting to find success in the last 2 years of his life. It's almost as if the art world pushes a particular narrative because it makes for a more interesting story, and ultimately that's what actually matters to these people. Not the art itself, but the stories behind them, regardless of how accurate they are in telling it. As I alluded to earlier, after photography became a thing, art started to get a bit more weird. The movement away from realism and academic art allowed artists to express themselves in more creative and interesting ways. People like to go on about how Renaissance art is the most prestigious, but let's face it, almost all of it is absolutely fucking boring. It's just commissions made by the rich from hundreds of years ago. Yes, it's all painted very nicely, but I don't really care about some French family the peasants would inevitably decapitate a few years down the line anyway. There's a reason why we stopped painting our prime ministers, presidents and monarchs. Because why would you bother when you can just take a photo?
What a scoop!
Contrast that with someone like Van Gogh's use of vibrant colours and abstract interpretations of nature. I mean, have you ever gone stargazing on acid? Because it looks a lot like Starry Night. That's brilliant. It's also how we got whatever the fuck Picasso and Dali were doing. Well, that and several cocktails of drugs, I imagine. Maybe it's just a Stone Roses fan of me talking, but I quite like a lot of Jackson Pollock stuff. Sure, it looks more or less like nonsense, but I do like it. It's colourful, it looks cool, it would brighten up your living room. But all that being said, is it really worth over $50 million? If you didn't know already, the modern art world is an absolute scam, but to be honest, if you needed it pointed out to you that this is actually worthless shite, then you might have bigger problems. Let's play another episode of how to make millions for you and your rich friends by exploiting the modern art market. Shortest explanation ever. Take your money, buy a worthless painting for a ludicrous price, increasing the value of said painting. Do this repeatedly, ideally with the same small group of artists, increasing the value of your collection. Sell it off to someone doing the same thing you are. Profit, tax deductible, money, Ferraris, mansions, lawyers.
I am sold.
You can easily move your money around and make more of it simply by doing nothing but buying blank canvases of bananas taped to walls. The sad reality is that increasingly being an artist is becoming a waste of time. Why bother working hard on a painting when a banana stuck to a wall sells for hundreds of thousands of dollars? Why spend days, months or years of your life working on a painting when you can ask the machines to make something that will probably come out better in just a few seconds? Mainstream art has already been lacking artistry for some time now, and the future of AI is going to make things 1,000 times worse. There is almost no incentive these days in studying how to become a painter or sketch artist or whatever, and that's kind of a shame. Fuck off. In conclusion, most art is kinda shit, especially the prestigious stuff you're supposed to care about. The Mona Lisa, kinda crap. Crybaby in hell with his dick getting bitten off by a snake. That's my shit. Abstract art can be more interesting, but the overinflated price tags are a real turn off, especially considering some of this. It just isn't art, it's just a banana taped to a wall. Fucking AI art has more creative input in it than a fucking banana taped to a wall. that our world is stupid. Going to see a famous painting just because it's famous is kinda stupid. Manipulating historical events and facts to fit a narrative in order to increase the worth of a painting is stupid. I just think that we should judge art for its own sake, you know, judge it by its own merits and not get involved in everything else. Well, it really took me 15 minutes to say that. But it doesn't fucking matter anyway because the robots are taking over. That's the end of the video. I'm not really sure what else to add there. Probably see you in July, I guess.